Shiny Pokémon have drifted through the collective imagination of trainers for nearly 3 decades now, glimmering like distant stars across countless regions and generations. These alternate colored creatures became more than simple variations or palette swaps. They transformed into symbols of patience, dedication, and the quiet thrill of encountering something truly extraordinary. The earliest odds were 1 in 8,192, a number so astronomically low that entire childhood journeys could pass without ever glimpsing that telltale sparkle. But within this already impossibly rare category, certain creatures stand even further beyond reach, dwelling in territories where mechanics, events, and sheer impossibility converge into legends whispered between collectors late at night. And the best place to start is where a mythical water type sits quietly behind one of the strangest shiny locks ever programmed into the series. Manaphy exists in a space few Pokemon have ever occupied, caught between mythology and mechanics in ways that made its shiny form almost completely unobtainable through legitimate means. When the fourth generation introduced this gentle, oceanic guardian, it arrived not through wild encounters or legendary battles, but through a special egg that players could transfer from Pokemon Ranger titles into Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum. The egg itself seemed ordinary enough at first glance, just another mythical distribution tucked into a spin-off adventure, but the mechanics beneath its surface created one of the most frustrating shiny hunts in the entire franchise. What made Manaphy's situation unique was how the game determined whether the hatched Pokemon would be shiny. The check happened when the egg was generated in Ranger, not when it hatched in the main series games. This meant that no amount of soft resetting before the egg hatched would ever change the outcome, a heartbreaking reality for hunters who discovered this mechanic too late. The only method to obtain a shiny Manaphy required trading the egg to another player before it hatched, because the shiny determination would recalculate based on the receiving trainer's ID and secret ID values. Even with this knowledge, the process remained incredibly tedious and impractical for most players. You needed access to both a Ranger game and a main series title. You needed a friend willing to participate in this elaborate trading ritual, and even after coordinating all of this, the odds remained stubbornly fixed at the standard 1 in 8,192 rate of that generation. No shiny charm existed to improve those chances, no Masuda method could be applied, and the mythical nature of Manaphy meant you couldn't simply encounter it in the wild to try again and again. The community response to this revelation created a lasting legacy around shiny Manaphy that persists even today, long after newer games have introduced more accessible, shiny hunting methods. Forums filled with stories of players attempting this hunt, coordinating trades with strangers across the globe, hatching egg after egg only to be met with the standard blue coloration time and time again. The frustration built not just from the low odds, but from the sheer logistical complexity of even attempting the hunt properly. You couldn't just boot up your game and try whenever inspiration struck. You needed another person, another save file, and the willingness to trade away a mythical egg on the slim hope that it might sparkle for someone else. And before you drift off, maybe tap subscribe for more gentle videos, and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Most shiny Manaphy seen in online trades or battles are suspected to be hacked or cloned, a sad reality that only reinforces how genuinely rare a legitimate one truly is. The few trainers who possess real shiny Manaphy, obtained through proper methods, became celebrities in collecting circles, their stories shared like folklore among those who appreciate the dedication required. These weren't just lucky encounters or even patient hunts. They represented coordinated efforts involving multiple people, multiple games, and countless hours invested into a single goal. The shiny form itself glows with a vibrant pink hue that differs beautifully from the standard blue, a visual reward that feels almost mythical given how few people have ever seen it in their own game without external assistance. The mythology surrounding Manaphy adds another layer to its shiny's legendary status in ways that extend beyond simple game mechanics into the broader narrative of what this creature represents. According to Pokedex entries, Manaphy possesses the unusual ability to bond with any Pokemon, sensing their emotions and creating connections that transcend species barriers. It's described as being born in cold ocean depths, drifting through currents before eventually returning to the place of its birth, no matter how far it travels. This migratory nature, this sense of a creature connected to vast aquatic mysteries, made Manaphy feel genuinely special even in its standard form. The anime and movies reinforced this image, particularly in Pokemon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea, where Manaphy was portrayed as an almost divine guardian of oceanic balance. Seeing such a mythical being rendered in alternate colors felt like witnessing something that shouldn't exist, a glitch in reality itself, rather than a huntable variant. The cultural impact of that ninth Pokemon movie cannot be understated when discussing Manaphy's legacy. The film depicted the creature as childlike and innocent, forming deep bonds with humans while maintaining an otherworldly quality that set it apart from typical Pokemon. Audiences around the world fell in love with this gentle water type, which only made the inaccessibility of its shiny form feel more poignant. It became a symbol of something beautiful that existed just beyond reach, visible but untouchable, present in the game's data, but locked away behind mechanics so convoluted that most players would never experience it legitimately. The breeding connection between Manaphy and Phione created yet another unusual dynamic that separated this mythical from others in its category. Manaphy remains the only mythical Pokemon capable of breeding, producing Phione eggs when paired with Ditto in the daycare. However, these Phione could never evolve into Manaphy, creating a strange one-way relationship where the parent and offspring existed in separate evolutionary tiers despite their obvious connection. This quirk gave Manaphy a unique place in Pokemon taxonomy, neither fully legendary nor truly breedable in the traditional sense. The fact that you could obtain multiple Phione, but only ever have access to a single Manaphy per save file, emphasized its specialness, and by extension, made shiny Manaphy feel even more impossible to obtain through conventional means. As we drift a little deeper into the world of unobtainable shinies tonight, another name surfaces from the depths of Generation 4's mythology, one whose very existence remained locked away from most players for the better part of a decade. Darkrai stands as perhaps the most enigmatic of all mythical Pokemon, a creature of nightmares and shadows whose standard form was already difficult enough to obtain, let alone its glimmering purple variant. Unlike Manaphy, which had a specific method however convoluted, Darkray's shiny form existed in a state of near total inaccessibility for years, programmed into the games but locked behind event distributions that never occurred in most regions. The fourth generation introduced this dark type as a creature tied to nightmares, dwelling on New Moon Island and causing endless bad dreams to those unlucky enough to encounter it. The member card event item was required to access New Moon Island and encounter Darkrai in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. However, this event was distributed incredibly sparingly, limited to specific regions and time frames that left most of the global player base unable to participate. Japan received the event first, followed by limited distributions in North America and Europe, but many countries never saw the member card distributed at all. Even players who managed to obtain the member card and catch Darkrai faced another obstacle The encountered Darkrai was shiny locked in most cases, meaning that no amount of soft resetting would produce the alternate purple coloration. The game simply refused to generate a shiny Darkrai through normal encounter methods during these early distributions. The only legitimate way to obtain a shiny Darkrai during Generation 4 came through an incredibly rare Japanese event that distributed the creature directly rather than providing an encounter. This event was so limited in scope that only a tiny fraction of Japanese players could attend, and players outside Japan had virtually no access whatsoever. The distribution lasted for a brief window at specific locations, requiring physical attendance that made it impossible for most collectors to even attempt acquiring one. As a result, legitimate shiny Darkrai from Generation 4 became one of the rarest Pokémon in existence, with so few distributed that each one could be traced back to that specific event. Years would pass before other opportunities arose, and even those remained limited to specific promotions that most players would never encounter. The design of shiny Darkrai holds a particular appeal that made its inaccessibility all the more frustrating for collectors and fans of the creature. While the standard form features a black body with a red collar and white hair, the shiny variant shifts to deep purple tones with contrasting accents that create an even more ominous and mysterious appearance. The color change feels thematically appropriate for a creature of nightmares, as though the shiny version represents an even deeper level of darkness, a shadow within shadows. Fan communities spent years sharing images of this rare variant, discussing its beauty and lamenting how few people would ever legitimately own one. The design became iconic despite its scarcity, appearing in fan art and discussions far more frequently than its actual distribution numbers would suggest. Darkrai's role in Pokémon lore extends beyond its mechanical rarity into narrative territory that reinforces why its shiny form feels so mythologically significant. Pokédex entries describe how Darkrai causes intense nightmares to anyone nearby, not out of malice, but simply as a natural consequence of its existence. It's portrayed as a lonely creature, avoiding contact with others to prevent inadvertently causing suffering through its nightmare-inducing presence. This tragic characterization was explored deeply in the 10th Pokémon movie, The Rise of Darkrai, where the creature acted as a misunderstood protector of a town threatened by the clash between Dialga and Palkia. The movie humanized Darkrai in ways that made audiences sympathize with its isolation, creating emotional connections that made the shiny form feel even more special, a rare glimpse of something that typically hides from the world. The anime's portrayal created a lasting cultural impact that elevated Darkrai beyond its in-game mechanics into something approaching legendary status among fans. The movie depicted it as noble, despite its fearsome reputation, willing to sacrifice itself to protect others even though they feared and misunderstood it. This narrative resonance made shiny Darkrai not just a rare collectible, but a symbol of something deeper, the idea that beauty and value can exist in darkness, that alternate forms of misunderstood creatures might be worth pursuing despite the difficulty involved. When players discuss the rarest shinies, Darkrai almost always enters the conversation not just because of its low distribution numbers, but because of the emotional weight the creature carries within most Pokemon's broader mythology. As newer generations introduced additional methods to obtain Darkrai, the shiny lock began to lift in certain circumstances, though the creature never became easily huntable. Generation 6 and 7 saw limited event distributions that sometimes allowed for shiny variants, though these remained region-specific and time-limited in ways that excluded most players. The introduction of Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl in Generation 8 finally allowed players to soft reset for shiny Darkrai through the member card event, But by this point, the original Generation 4 Shiny Darkrai had cemented its place in history as one of the most exclusive Pokemon ever distributed. Collectors who owned one from the original Japanese event possessed a genuine relic, a piece of Pokemon history that represented not just luck or patience, but the right combination of geographic location and timing. The story of Shiny Darkrai speaks to larger themes about how event distributions have shaped the landscape of rare Pokemon collecting over the years. Unlike shinies that could be hunted through wild encounters or breeding, event-exclusive creatures existed at the mercy of official distributions that players had no control over. You couldn't improve your odds through better methods or more dedication. You either had access to the event or you didn't, creating a barrier that skill and patience could never overcome. This dynamic made event-exclusive shinies feel fundamentally different from hunt-based rarities, transforming them into time capsules that captured specific moments in Pokemon's distribution history. Each one tells a story about when and where it was obtained, creating a geographic and temporal map of the franchise's global reach. Slowly, the narrative widens to encompass another creature whose shiny form existed in an unusual state of partial accessibility, creating confusion and frustration among hunters who couldn't quite understand the mechanics at play. Shaman entered the Pokemon world in Generation 4 as a graceful grass type with the unique ability to change between two distinct forms, land form and sky form. Both forms possessed their own shiny variants with different color palettes, and therein lay the complexity that made Shiny Shaman such a fascinating case study in how event mechanics could create unexpected barriers. The land form appeared in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum through the Oak's Letter event, which provided access to Flower Paradise, where Shaman could be encountered and captured. However, like many mythical encounters from this generation, Shaman was shiny locked during most distributions, preventing players from soft resetting for the alternate green coloration. The shiny lock on Shaman felt particularly frustrating because the creature could theoretically be encountered through gameplay rather than just received as a direct gift. Players stood in Flower Paradise, able to see Shaman appear and initiate battles, yet the game stubbornly refused to allow the shiny version to generate no matter how many times they reset. This created a psychological tension that direct gift distributions didn't produce. You could engage with the encounter loop, you could see the creature appear again and again, but the outcome was predetermined in ways that made the process feel futile. The illusion of control without actual agency proved more frustrating than simply receiving a locked Pokemon directly, because it suggested that Shiny Shaman should be possible while simultaneously preventing it from occurring. Legitimate Shiny Shaman eventually became obtainable through specific movie distributions and promotional events, primarily in Japan, that provided the creature in its shiny land form. These distributions were predictably limited in scope and duration, creating the familiar pattern of geographic and temporal exclusivity that defined so many mythical shinies. Players who managed to obtain these event shaman possessed something genuinely special, but they also faced another challenge unique to this creature, the transformation between land form and sky form. When Shaman holds a Gracidia flower during daytime hours while not frozen, it transforms into sky form, a process that allows it to learn different moves and access flying-type attacks. The shiny variant maintains its alternate coloration through this transformation, shifting from pale green in land form to pale pink and white in sky form. This dual form nature created the interesting dynamics for shiny collectors who appreciated seeing both variants of the alternate coloration. Some preferred to keep their shiny shaman perpetually in land form to maintain the rare pale green appearance, while others enjoyed transforming it back and forth to appreciate how the shiny palette adapted across both designs. The Skyform's shiny variant, in particular, became beloved among collectors for its soft pink and cream coloring, which contrasted beautifully with the more vibrant greens of the standard Sky form. This aesthetic appeal made Shiny Shaman especially desirable beyond its rarity, creating a situation where the creature was sought after both for its exclusivity and for its genuinely beautiful, alternate design across two distinct forms. The mythology surrounding Shaman reinforced its image as a creature tied to gratitude, nature, and environmental balance in ways that made its shiny forms feel symbolically significant. Pokédex entries describe how Shaman can dissolve toxins in the air and transform ruined land into flower-covered fields, acting as a purifying force that heals damaged environments. It's said to migrate to flower fields during certain seasons, traveling in groups to places where grassidea flowers bloom. This connection to seasonal change and natural cycles gave Shaman a gentle, benevolent image that contrasted with darker mythicals like Darkrai. The shiny variant, with its softer coloration, seemed to embody an even purer version of these themes, as though the alternate palette represented an idealized form of Shaman's healing nature. The anime featured Shaman prominently in the 11th movie, Giratina and the Sky Warrior, where it served as a key character whose journey drove the plot forward. The movie depicted Shaman as somewhat temperamental and sassy despite its small size, creating a personality that endeared it to audiences while maintaining its mythical status. Fans who watched this movie often developed strong attachments to Shaman, making the desire to own a shiny version feel more personal than simple collecting impulses. It represented not just a rare Pokémon, but a connection to memories of watching that film, to the emotional journeys Shaman had underwent, and to the broader themes of gratitude and environmental healing that the creature embodied. This emotional resonance transformed Shiny Shaman from a mere collectible into something approaching a meaningful symbol. Before we move deeper into this gentle exploration, it's worth reflecting on how event distributions shaped the entire landscape of mythical Pokémon collecting during Generation 4 and beyond. The pattern established during this era of creatures programmed into games but locked behind limited time, region-specific events created a collecting environment fundamentally different from earlier generations. Where Generation 1 and 2 featured mythicals like Mew and Celebi that were primarily distributed through special events but weren't programmed to be shiny in their original releases. Generation 4 introduced the concept of mythicals with shiny variants that existed in the data but remained largely inaccessible. This shift created a new category of rarity that transcended hunting skill or dedication, making some shinies dependent entirely on geographic location and timing rather than player effort. As we drift a little deeper tonight, the conversation turns toward legendary Pokémon rather than mythicals, a distinction that matters greatly in discussions of shiny accessibility and hunting methods. Legendary Pokémon, unlike mythicals, can typically be encountered through normal gameplay without requiring event distributions or special items. They appear as part of the main story or post-game content, allowing players to engage with them through standard battle mechanics. However, even within this more accessible category, certain legendary shinies achieved notorious status due to shiny locks, limited encounter opportunities, or mechanics that made hunting them extraordinarily difficult. The legendary birds of Generation 1, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, became popular shiny hunt targets once Fire Red and Leaf Green removed the shiny lock that prevented them from appearing in alternate colors during the original Red and Blue releases. The trio of legendary birds each possessed shiny forms that changed their iconic color schemes in ways that ranged from subtle to dramatic. Articuno's shiny variant shifted from its classic blue and purple tones to lighter, almost lavender-like blues and pinks, creating a gentler appearance that some collectors preferred over the standard design. Zapdos transformed from yellow and black to a vibrant orange that maintained the electric energy while shifting the entire palette warmer. Moltres, perhaps most dramatically, changed from yellow, orange, and red flames to pink and salmon tones that created a completely different visual impression. These color changes meant that hunting for shiny legendary birds wasn't just about obtaining rare variants, it was about fundamentally altering the visual identity of creatures that had been iconic in their standard forms since the franchise's beginning. The hunting process for these birds in fire red and leaf green required patience and careful preparation, as each bird had only a single encounter opportunity per save file in the original games. Players needed to save directly before encountering the bird, then soft reset repeatedly until the shiny variant appeared. With the odds of 1 in 8,192 and no methods to improve those chances, in Generation 3, hunting these birds became a test of pure perseverance. Some hunts lasted for days, weeks, or even months of continuous soft resetting, creating stories of dedication that became legendary within the shiny hunting community. The static encounter nature meant that each reset took roughly the same amount of time, creating a meditative loop of saving, encountering, checking colors, and resetting that could become almost hypnotic during extended sessions. The roaming legendary beasts of Generation 2, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, presented a different challenge entirely for shiny hunters, one that combined rarity with mechanical complexity in ways that made them among the most frustrating shinies to hunt. Unlike static encounters, where you could soft reset in front of the Pokémon, roaming legendaries generated their stats and shiny status when they were first released into the wild, then maintained those values as they fled from route to route. In gold, silver, and crystal, this meant that the shiny check for Raikou and Entei happened during the Burned Tower event, where they were awakened and released. Players who wanted to hunt these shinies needed to save before triggering the event, then soft reset until one or both beasts generated as shiny, a process made incredibly tedious because you couldn't check their status until actually encountering them in the wild. The Generation 3 remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green, introduced a different roaming legendary depending on your starter choice. Players who chose Squirtle would eventually encounter a Picote, Sudsol to Saint Salon. Roaming Entei, Bulbasaur led to Suicune, and Charmander resulted in Raikou. These roamers operated under the same mechanics as their Generation 2 counterparts, with their shiny status determined when they were first released rather than during each individual encounter. This meant hunters needed to soft reset before the roaming began, then chase the creature across Kanto to verify whether it had generated as shiny. The process could take hours just to check a single reset, as roaming Pokémon fled immediately upon encounter, forcing players to chase them from location to location while hoping to get close enough to see their coloration before they escaped again. The shiny variants of the legendary beasts each possess striking color changes that made them highly desirable despite the difficulty of obtaining them. Raikou's shiny form traded its purple and yellow palette for a rich gold and bronze appearance that many collectors considered superior to the original design. Entei shifted from brown and red to a darker, more chocolate-toned brown that gave it a more subdued but elegant look. Suicune, perhaps most dramatically, transformed from blue and purple to a pale, almost icy blue that perfectly complemented its water-type identity. These aesthetic changes meant that hunting the beasts wasn't just about rarity, it was about obtaining what many considered improved versions of already beloved designs. adding motivation beyond simple completion to the hunting process. There's a quiet comfort in remembering moments when Generation 4 introduced its own legendary trio, the late Guardians Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, each presenting unique challenges for shiny hunters that require different approaches and varying levels of patience. Uxie and Azelf could be hunted through standard soft resetting methods at their lake caverns, making them relatively straightforward if time-consuming targets for dedicated hunters. However, Mesprit followed the roaming legendary pattern established by the beasts, generating its shiny status when first encountered at Lake Verity before fleeing to roam Sinnoh. This created the familiar frustration of needing to check the roaming Pokémon across multiple encounters to verify its coloration, though Generation 4 at least provided the Poketch marking map that made tracking roamers somewhat less tedious than in previous generations. The color changes for the late Guardian's shiny forms ranged from subtle to significant in ways that created interesting discussions about which variants looked best. Uxie's shiny form shifted from yellow to a pale green that some collectors found underwhelming compared to more dramatic shiny variants, though others appreciated the subtlety. Mesprit changed from pink to yellow, creating a more noticeable transformation that made the difficult roaming hunt feel more rewarding for those who completed it. Azelf perhaps underwent the most visually striking change, transforming from blue to pink in a complete color inversion that created an entirely different aesthetic impression. These varying degrees of color change meant that hunters often had strong preferences about which lake guardian they wanted to pursue, factoring visual appeal alongside hunting difficulty when choosing their targets. The legendary giants of Generation 3, Regirock, Regice, and Registeel, became beloved shiny hunt targets due to their unique acquisition methods and the satisfying color changes their shiny forms provided. Each Regi required solving environmental puzzles to access their sealed chambers, creating a sense of accomplishment even before encountering the Pokémon itself. Once inside their chambers, the Regis could be soft reset indefinitely, making them patient hunter-friendly targets despite the 1 in 8,192 odds. The puzzles involving Braille added an educational element that made the entire hunting process feel more meaningful than simple soft resetting, connecting the mechanical act of shiny hunting to the lore and world building that made these legendary golems feel ancient and mysterious. Shiny Regirock traded its orange-brown coloring for a darker, reddish-brown that gave it a more imposing appearance while maintaining its rocky aesthetic. Shiny Regice shifted from light blue to deeper purple-blue tones that made it feel even more icy and remote, perfectly complementing its frozen cave dwelling. Shiny Registeel changed from silver gray to a darker charcoal color that some hunters found disappointingly subtle, though others appreciated how the darker tones made the Pokémon look even more metallic and industrial. These color variations meant that the Regi trio offered something for every type of collector: dramatic changes for those who wanted visually striking shinies, and subtle shifts for those who appreciated more understated, alternate palettes. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The creation trio of Generation 4, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, represented a significant challenge just for shiny hunters, not because of their mechanics, but because of their importance to the main story, and the fact that each had only a single encounter per save file in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. These weren't post-game optional encounters like most other legendaries. They were mandatory story battles that players needed to either catch or defeat to progress. This created pressure to catch them in regular Pokeballs for aesthetic reasons, to catch them with specific natures for competitive use, or to hunt them for their shiny forms, but attempting all three simultaneously proved nearly impossible given the single encounter limitation. Many players chose to prioritize shiny hunting these trio members in later games where they could be encountered through different methods, but the original Diamond and Pearl hunts remained prestigious accomplishments within the shiny hunting community. Dialga's shiny form changed from blue and silver to a striking teal and gold combination that many considered one of the most beautiful legendary shinies in the entire series. The color shift felt thematically appropriate for a creature that controlled time, as though the alternate palette represented a different temporal flow or a parallel timeline version of the legendary dragon. Palkia's shiny variant shifted from pink and purple to a darker, more regal purple and black that gave it a more intimidating appearance, befitting a deity of space. These color changes were dramatic enough that hunters felt genuine excitement when the shiny finally appeared after potentially thousands of resets, creating memorable moments that players remembered years later as among their most satisfying Pokemon experiences. Giratina occupied a unique position among the creation trio due to its two distinct forms: altered form in the normal world and origin form in the distortion world, or while holding the Griseous orb. Both forms possessed shiny variants with different color schemes, making shiny Giratina especially desirable for collectors who appreciated seeing alternate palettes across multiple designs. The altered form's shiny shifted from black and red to silver and blue, creating a ghostly appearance that perfectly suited its role as a creature banished to another dimension. Origin form's shiny maintained similar color themes, but applied them to the more serpentine design, creating a flowing, ethereal look that many collectors preferred over the altered form variant. The Distortion World encounter with Giratina in Platinum created one of the most memorable legendary battles in the series, combining unique mechanics with narrative weight and environmental storytelling that made the encounter feel genuinely special. Hunting for shiny Giratina in this context meant soft resetting not just for a rare color variant, but within the context of one of Pokemon's most atmospheric and lore-rich locations. The Distortion World's gravity-defying platforms and surreal architecture created a dreamlike setting that made encountering a shiny Giratina feel like witnessing something from a nightmare or vision rather than a standard Pokemon battle. This environmental context added emotional weight to successful shiny hunts, transforming them from mere collecting achievements into narrative moments that felt integrated into the game's larger mythology. As we drift a little deeper into the realm of unobtainable shinies tonight, the conversation must inevitably turn toward the deity that sits at the apex of Pokemon's creation mythology, a creature whose very existence implies omnipotence, and whose shiny form remained inaccessible to most players for over a decade. Arceus holds a unique position in Pokemon lore as the creator of the universe itself, described in ancient Sinnoh texts as having shaped all things from the chaos that existed before reality. According to legend, it emerged from an egg in nothingness and created Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina to govern time, space, and antimatter respectively, then created Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf to provide knowledge, emotion, and willpower to living beings. This mythological framework made Arceus feel genuinely godlike in ways few other Pokemon approached. The sheer inaccessibility of Arceus in its standard form already created a legendary status that its shiny variant magnified exponentially. During Generation 4, Arceus was programmed into Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, but never officially distributed through normal means. The Azure Flute item that would trigger an encounter with Arceus at the Hall of Origin existed in the game's data, but was never distributed to players outside of hacking or exploiting glitches. Game director Junichi Masuda later explained that they felt the Azure Flute event was too confusing for players to figure out, leading them to leave it unimplemented. This decision created one of gaming's most famous instances of dummied out content, where a fully functional and programmed encounter existed in millions of copies of the game, but remained locked away from legitimate access. The few legitimate shiny Arceus that entered circulation during Generation 4 came from an incredibly limited Japanese movie distribution that provided the creature directly rather than through an in-game encounter. This event ran for only a brief period at select theaters, showing the 12th Pokémon movie, Arceus and the Jewel of Life, creating geographic and temporal barriers that made attendance nearly impossible for most players, even within Japan. The distribution numbers were so small that each legitimate shiny Arceus from this event could be individually documented and traced, making them some of the most valuable Pokémon in existence from a collecting standpoint. Players who missed this event had no other legitimate method to obtain shiny Arceus during Generation 4, transforming it into the ultimate unobtainable for most of the world. The visual design of shiny Arceus contributed significantly to its desirable status beyond mere rarity, as the color change from pure white to pale gold created an appearance many collectors considered even more divine and impressive than the standard form. The golden coloration felt thematically perfect for a creator deity, evoking images of divine light, heavenly radiance, and the golden idols worshipped in various mythologies around the world. Fan artists embraced this imagery, depicting shiny Arceus with halos, sunbursts, and radiating light effects that reinforced its status as the ultimate deity Pokémon. The fact that such a visually stunning design remained inaccessible to most players only increased its mystique, making it a symbol of perfection that existed just beyond reach. The lore surrounding Arceus's ability to change types using plates added another dimension to its already complex mythology in ways that made collectors appreciate the shiny variant even more. Arceus could hold any of the 17 type-specific plates to change its type and the type of its signature move. Judgment, making it the only Pokémon capable of becoming any type while maintaining the same base species. This versatility reinforced its image as a supreme being unbound by normal type limitations, and the idea of a golden shiny Arceus adapting to represent every type created fascinating visual imagery that fans explored through countless pieces of artwork. A golden dragon-type Arceus holding the Draco plate felt different aesthetically from a golden fire-type holding the flame plate, even though the actual color remained the same. The 12th Pokémon movie, that featured Arceus as the central character, explored its mythology in ways that elevated the creature's cultural significance beyond its gameplay mechanics. The film depicted Arceus as having been betrayed by humans in ancient times, leading to a deep mistrust that threatened to result in the destruction of humanity. This storyline gave Arceus emotional depth and a tragic backstory that made it feel less like an abstract deity and more like a character with motivations and wounds. Fans who watched this movie developed emotional connections to Arceus that made owning a shiny version feel personally meaningful rather than just completing a collection. It represented a connection to that story, to the themes of betrayal and redemption the movie explored, and to the idea that even gods could be wounded and healed. When Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver were released, they included an interesting connection to Arceus through an event that would allow players to obtain one of the Creation Trio at level 1 through the Sinjo Ruins event. If players brought the movie-distributed Arceus to the ruins of Alph, they would trigger a special scene where Arceus would create an egg containing Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina, depending on player choice. This event reinforced Arceus's role as the creator of these legendary dragons, while providing narrative context for its godlike powers. However, the event required ownership of the event-distributed Arceus, making it accessible only to those fortunate enough to have attended the original Japanese movie distribution or later international distributions that remained similarly limited. As newer generations introduced additional Arceus distributions, the shiny form gradually became more accessible through various limited events, though it never approached anything resembling common availability. Generation 6 saw distributions through serial codes that sometimes included shiny Arceus, while Generation 7 featured similar limited promotions. The Pokemon Legends Arceus game in Generation 8 finally allowed players to encounter Arceus through normal gameplay, but the creature remained shiny locked even in this encounter, preventing players from hunting it despite finally having legitimate access to the Pokemon itself. This continued restriction ensured that shiny Arceus maintained its status as one of the rarest variants in the franchise, available only through external events rather than player effort. The competitive Pokemon scene has historically banned Arceus from most formats due to its overwhelming power and versatility, but in the few contexts where it was allowed, shiny variants commanded immediate attention and respect. Trainers who displayed shiny Arceus in battle simulators or official tournaments immediately established themselves as serious collectors who had access to incredibly rare distributions. The golden form appearing on screen felt like a flex beyond mere team building. It demonstrated connections to exclusive events, geographic privilege, or at minimum, successful trading relationships with those who had such access. This social signaling aspect of shiny Arceus created value beyond the Pokemon itself, transforming it into a status symbol within collecting communities. Before your eyes grow heavy, it's worth considering how the Arceus mythology influenced Game Freak's approach to deity Pokemon in later generations, creating a template that subsequent powerful legendaries would follow or deliberately subvert. Generation 5 introduced Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem as a trio of dragons whose lore suggested ancient significance and world-shaping power, while Generation 6's Xerneas and Yveltal represented life and death in similarly mythological terms. However, none of these creatures occupied quite the same theological position as Arceus, which remained unique in its explicit role as the creator of everything. This singularity made Arceus's shiny form feel irreplaceable in ways that other legendary shinies, however rare, could never quite match. The distribution history of mythical Pokemon shinies reveals patterns about how Game Freak and the Pokemon Company approached event distributions across different regions and generations, creating a complex map of accessibility that varied dramatically depending on where and when you were playing. Japanese players consistently received first or exclusive access to many mythical distributions, a pattern that created significant frustration among international fans who felt excluded from content that existed in their games but remained locked behind geographic barriers. The business logic behind this approach, that distribution served as promotional tools for movie releases and merchandise primarily focused on the Japanese market, made sense from a corporate perspective, but created collecting disparities that affected how players thought about rarity and value. North American distributions tended to arrive months or even years after Japanese events, if they occurred at all, creating situations where players in the US and Canada had brief windows to obtain mythicals that Japanese players had accessed much earlier. European distributions faced even greater delays and limitations, with some countries receiving virtually no local events and forcing collectors to rely on the international trades if they hoped to complete their mythical collections. This geographic lottery created a secondary market for event Pokémon that exists to this day, with traders offering valuable shinies or mythicals in exchange for those they couldn't obtain in their own regions. The ethics of this trading economy remains debated, particularly given how many traded event Pokémon turned out to be cloned or hacked despite claims of legitimacy. As we drift a little deeper tonight, the focus shifts toward legendary Pokémon whose shiny forms became notorious not for being event locked, but for requiring such extraordinary dedication to hunt that they achieved legendary status through sheer difficulty alone. The Regigigas encounters in Generation 4 presented unusual challenges that made shiny hunting this colossal legendary, an exercise in patience that went beyond typical soft resetting. In Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, encountering Regigigas required first obtaining all three of the legendary giants, Regirock, Regis, and Registeel, which in turn required trading them from Generation 3 games since they weren't available in Sinnoh. This cross-generational requirement created a barrier that casual players often couldn't overcome, as it demanded ownership of multiple games across two different hardware generations. Once all three Regis were obtained and brought to Snowpoint Temple, Regigigas would appear and could be battled and captured. The encounter itself could be soft reset for shiny hunting purposes, but the preparation required meant that hunters needed substantial commitment before even beginning the actual shiny hunt. Some players spent weeks or months assembling the necessary components, transferring Pokémon through PAL Park, and ensuring they had appropriate catching tools and strategies prepared. This front-loaded investment made abandoning a Regigigas hunt psychologically difficult, as quitting meant potentially wasting all the preparatory effort. Yet the hunt itself could easily stretch into tens of thousands of encounters at the standard 1 in 8,192 odds, creating a situation where dedication needed to be maintained across both preparation and execution. Shiny Regigigas shifts from its standard white and yellow color scheme to a darker beige and orange palette that creates a more earthy, ancient appearance, fitting for a Pokémon described as having toed continents with ropes in ancient times. The color change isn't as dramatically eye-catching as some other legendary shinies, leading to debates within the community about whether the effort required to hunt it was worth the aesthetic payoff. However, collectors who completed the hunt often valued their shiny Regigigas more than more as visually striking shinies specifically because of the effort invested. The Pokémon represented not just luck or patience, but also resourcefulness, planning, and the ability to overcome mechanical barriers that went beyond simple, soft resetting. The legendary birds received alternate forms in Pokémon Sword and Shield's Crown Tundra DLC that created new hunting opportunities while also generating controversy about design choices and shiny locks. Galarian Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres possessed completely different typing and appearances from their Kanto counterparts. Galarian Articuno became Psychic Flying, Galarian Zapdos became Fighting Flying, and Galarian Moltres became Dark Flying. These type changes reflected regional variation rather than simply being alternate versions, creating the unusual situation where two completely different Pokémon shared the same names due to superficial resemblance. The design split the community, with some appreciating the fresh take on classic legendaries while others felt the new forms strayed too far from the originals. What frustrated shiny hunters specifically about the Galarian legendary birds was the shiny lock applied to all three, preventing players from obtaining alternate colored versions despite the birds being encounterable through gameplay. After completing certain DLC requirements, the three birds would scatter across the Galar region and the Isle of Armor, requiring players to chase them down and capture them. The roaming nature of these encounters created excitement as players tracked rare birds across beautiful environments, but the inability to hunt for shiny variants felt like a missed opportunity that many collectors lamented. Game Freak's decision to shiny lock these Pokemon was never officially explained, though speculation suggested it related to the already low catch rates and the desire to prevent players from resetting encounters indefinitely in a game designed around quicker progression. The various Kyurem forms introduced in Generation 5 presented interesting shiny hunting scenarios that rewarded collectors who enjoyed seeing multiple forms of the same shiny Pokemon. Base Kyurem could be encountered and hunted in black and white, appearing in the giant chasm after defeating the Elite Four. Successfully hunting shiny Kyurem required standard soft resetting patience, but obtaining shiny black Kyurem or shiny white Kyurem required additional steps since these forms resulted from fusing Kyurem with Reshiram or Zekrom respectively. If shiny Kyurem was fused with regular Reshiram, the resulting black Kyurem would be shiny, and the same applied to fusions with Zekrom, creating shiny white Kyurem. This fusion mechanic created interesting decisions for collectors who obtained shiny Kyurem but also wanted shiny Reshiram or Zekrom for their collections. Using shiny Kyurem to create a fusion meant you couldn't simultaneously have both shiny base Kyurem and its altered form in your collection unless you hunted multiple shiny Kyurem. Some dedicated collectors chose to hunt shiny Kyurem multiple times, once to keep in base form, once to fuse with Reshiram, and once to fuse with Zekrom, creating complete collections that showcased all possible shiny variations. This level of dedication went beyond what most hunters attempted, but those who completed it took pride in having invested the time to fully explore every shiny possibility the Kyurem family offered. The color changes across Kyurem's forms created visually distinct shinies that made hunting multiple variants feel rewarding from an aesthetic standpoint. Shiny base Kyurem shifted from gray-blue to pale gold, creating a striking appearance that made it one of the more visually impressive Dragon Legendary shinies. Shiny black Kyurem maintained the gold coloration while adding the black accents from Zekrom, creating a regal black and gold combination that many considered superior to the standard blue and black. Shiny white Kyurem similarly combined the gold base with white highlights from Reshiram, creating an elegant appearance that complemented the form's ice-type attacks. These distinct color schemes meant that collectors could genuinely appreciate each form individually, rather than seeing them as redundant variations of the same shiny. Generation 6 introduced several legendary Pokemon whose shiny forms became notable for various mechanical quirks and distribution oddities that created unique collecting challenges. Xerneas and Yveltal, the cover legendaries of X and Y, could both be hunted through soft resetting during their mandatory story encounters, making them accessible shiny targets despite being version exclusives. However, Zygarde presented a more complex situation due to its multiple forms and the different methods of encountering it across Generations 6 and 7. In X and Y, Zygarde appeared as a single static encounter in Terminus Cave that could be hunted normally, but Generation 7's Sun and Moon introduced the Zygarde cell collection mechanic that allowed players to assemble Zygarde through collecting scattered cells rather than catching it. The Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon games further complicated Zygarde by making it available through the Ultra Wormhole mechanic, where it could be encountered in the wormholes alongside other legendary Pokemon. This method provided boosted shiny odds based on how far players traveled through the wormholes, with the maximum odds reaching approximately 1 in 300 when traveling maximum distance. This dramatic improvement over standard odds made shiny Zygarde much more accessible in Generation 7 than in Generation 6, creating a situation where the same Pokemon's rarity varied significantly depending on which game and method you used to hunt it. Collectors who obtained Shiny Zygarde through the original X and Y method at 1 in 4096 odds often felt their achievement was devalued, when later games made it substantially easier. The Type, Null, and Silvally line presented a unique case where a legendary Pokemon was shiny locked in its initial distribution but later became huntable through specific methods that required unusual preparation. Type. Null was given to players as a gift. Pokemon in Sun and Moon with perfect IVs but was shiny locked during this initial encounter, preventing any possibility of obtaining a shiny through normal gameplay. However, when Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon introduced a second type, Null Gift, after completing certain post-game objectives, this second one was not shiny locked and could be soft reset for its shiny form. This created a scenario where players needed to progress far enough into the post-game to receive the second type, Null, before they could even attempt hunting the shiny. The effort required to reach the point where the second type, Null, became available meant that hunters needed substantial dedication just to begin the hunt, similar to the preparation required for Regigigas in Generation 4, the shiny form of Type, Null, and its evolution. Silvally featured a blue and white color scheme instead of the standard gray, creating an appearance that many collectors found more appealing than the original design. The blue coloring gave both forms a sleeker, more futuristic look that complemented their artificial origins as Pokemon created through scientific experimentation. This aesthetic improvement motivated hunters to pursue shiny type Null. Despite the preparation required, valuing the visual payoff alongside the rarity. There's a quiet comfort in remembering moments like these, when dedicated collectors invest not just time, but planning and resource management into obtaining specific shinies that require more than simple, soft resetting. These hunts become projects that span days or weeks, requiring organization, note-taking, and sustained focus across multiple gameplay sessions. The satisfaction of completing such hunts often exceeds that of quicker, luck-based hunts, precisely because the investment was greater. Each component assembled, each prerequisite met, builds toward the final goal in ways that make the eventual success feel earned through multiple dimensions of effort, rather than just patient repetition. The mythical Pokemon Deoxys occupied an unusual position in shiny hunting history, transitioning from completely inaccessible to reasonably huntable as it appeared across multiple generations with varying levels of availability. During Generation 3, Deoxys could only be obtained through the Aurora Ticket event item distributed at specific promotional events, primarily in Japan and select international locations. Players who received the Aurora Ticket could travel to Birth Island and encounter Deoxys, but this encounter was not shiny locked, meaning dedicated hunters could soft reset for the shiny variant. However, the limited distribution of the Aurora Ticket meant that most players never had legitimate access to Deoxys at all, making even the standard form rare and the shiny form extraordinarily exclusive. The Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire remakes in Generation 6 made Deoxys significantly more accessible by incorporating it into the main story through the Delta episode post-game quest. After completing the episode's requirements, players could encounter Deoxys atop Sky Pillar, and this encounter could be soft reset for shiny hunting purposes. The odds remained at the standard 1 in 4096 for Generation 6, but the guaranteed access meant that anyone who owned the games could attempt the hunt without needing event distributions or special items. This democratization of Deoxys hunting created situations where the shiny variant became more common in later generations, despite having been nearly unobtainable during its original introduction. Deoxys's multiple forms, normal, attack, defense, and speed created interesting dynamics for shiny collectors, similar to Kyurem's fusion forms or Shyman's land and sky forms. Each form possessed the same shiny coloration, shifting from the standard orange and blue-green to a pale cyan and purple, but the way this palette applied across the different body configurations created visually distinct appearances. Shiny defense form Deoxys looked more armored and compact in its cyan coloring, while shiny attack form appeared more aggressive and sharp. Shiny speed form emphasized the sleek, streamlined nature of that configuration. Collectors could change between forms using meteorites found in various games, allowing them to appreciate how a single, shiny, adapted across multiple designs. The lore surrounding Deoxys as a space virus mutated by cosmic radiation gave it a science fiction quality distinct from most legendary Pokémon, which tended to draw from mythology or natural phenomena. This extraterrestrial origin made Deoxys feel appropriately alien and mysterious, and the shiny coloration somehow enhanced this otherworldly impression. The purple and cyan palette felt more extraterrestrial than the standard orange, as though the shiny variant represented an even more mutated or cosmically altered version of an already strange creature. Collectors who obtained shiny Deoxys often appreciated this thematic resonance between the color change and the Pokemon's narrative origins. The various Ultra Beast species introduced in Generation 7 created controversy within the collecting community about whether they should be considered legendary Pokémon and whether their relatively high, shiny encounter rates diminished the value of hunting them. Ultra Beasts could be encountered through Ultra Space after completing certain story requirements in Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, and Ultra Moon, and while each species could only be caught in limited numbers, the encounters themselves had significantly better shiny odds than standard wild encounters. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon specifically, Ultra Beasts encountered through wormholes had boosted shiny rates that could reach approximately 1 in 30 when traveling maximum distances, making them among the easiest legendary tier Pokémon to obtain in shiny form. This accessibility created debates about whether shiny Ultra Beasts counted as truly rare or impressive, given how dramatically the odds were improved compared to other legendaries. Some collectors argued that any shiny legendary required dedication and thus deserved recognition, while others felt that the boosted odds made Ultra Beast shinies too common to feel special. The various Ultra Beast species each possessed unique shiny colorations that ranged from subtle to dramatic. Nihilego changed from white and blue to a darker blue-black. Circuitry shifted from black and copper to white and silver. Celesteela changed from green and white to gold, and Kartana transformed from white and orange to dark gray. These color changes meant that even if the hunts were easier, the results often looked visually distinct and appealing. As we drift a little deeper into this gentle exploration, the conversation turns toward a phenomenon that affected certain shiny hunts in unexpected ways: the introduction of regional variants that shared names with their original counterparts but possessed different types, abilities, and often completely different evolutionary paths. Alolan forms in Generation 7 and Galarian forms in Generation 8 created situations where multiple distinct Pokémon existed under the same species name, each with their own shiny variants. This meant that collectors who wanted complete shiny and living dexes needed to hunt both the original and regional variant forms, doubling the work required for affected species. Alolan Raichu presented an interesting case as a regional variant of a Kanto evolution that could only be obtained by evolving Pichu or Pikachu while in the Alola region. Shiny Alolan Raichu featured a darker brown coloration instead of the standard gold, creating an appearance that many collectors preferred over both standard Alolan Raichu and shiny Cantonian Raichu. The psychic typing and surfing animation unique to Alolan Raichu gave it gameplay distinctiveness that made hunting the shiny form feel purposeful beyond simple collecting, as the variant offered different competitive utility. Collectors needed to breed shiny Pichu or Pikachu in Generation 7 specifically, then evolve it in Alola to obtain shiny Alolan Raichu, creating methodological requirements that went beyond simply encountering and catching. The Galarian forms of the legendary birds discussed earlier weren't the only regional variants that frustrated shiny hunters through shiny locks. Galarian Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres were joined by several other Galarian Pokémon whose shiny forms became highly sought after specifically because of their aesthetic improvements over the standard designs. Galarian Corsola and its evolution, Corsola possessed shiny forms that changed their ghostly white coloration to subtle blue-tinted shades that created a more spectral appearance. Galarian Ponyta and Rapidash already had beautiful pastel color schemes in their standard forms, and the shiny variants shifted these to blue and purple tones that many collectors considered even more appealing. The fact that these could be hunted normally without shiny locks made them popular targets despite requiring specific location or weather conditions to encounter. Before we continue this gentle journey deeper into the mechanics of shiny hunting, it's important to acknowledge how different hunting methods have evolved across generations, each creating different relationships between the effort, time investment, and ultimate success. Soft resetting for static legendary encounters represents perhaps the purest form of shiny hunting. No special mechanics, no improved odds, just patient repetition until luck aligns. This method rewards dedication and creates meditative rhythms that many hunters find almost therapeutic, despite the potential for extremely long hunts. The simplicity means that success feels entirely earned through persistence, with no external factors or method optimizations to credit beyond the hunter's own unwillingness to quit. Breeding for shinies through the Masuda method, introduced in Generation 4, created a different hunting paradigm where preparation and planning mattered as much as patience. By breeding Pokémon from games with different language settings, players could significantly improve their shiny odds from the base rates to approximately 1 in 683 in later generations when combined with the shiny charm. This method required obtaining foreign Pokémon through trading or owning games in multiple languages, creating a social or resource component that purely luck-based methods lacked. Successful Masuda hunters often credited not just their time investment, but also their trading connections and ability to acquire proper breeding pairs. Chain fishing in Generation 6 introduced a method where shiny odds improved dramatically with each consecutive successful fishing encounter, eventually reaching odds as high as approximately 1 in 100 after extended chains. This method made water-type shinies dramatically more accessible than ever before, creating situations where hunters could reasonably expect to encounter multiple shinies in a single day if they maintained their chains properly. The mechanic required attention and care to avoid breaking chains through mistakes or bad luck, creating an active engagement distinct from the passive repetition of soft resetting. Successful chain fishing felt less like pure persistence and more like skillful execution, rewarding players who mastered the timing and technique required to maintain long chains. The SOS chaining method in Generation 7 created another active shiny hunting technique where wild Pokémon would call for help when low on HP, potentially summoning allies that appeared at increased shiny rates after extended chains. Maintaining SOS chains required specific strategies to prevent the battle from ending, while ensuring the original Pokemon continued calling for help, creating a management challenge that went beyond simple repetition. Long SOS chains could reach shiny odds of approximately 1 in 300 after accounting for the shiny charm, making this method reasonably efficient for species that could be encountered through SOS battles. The dynamic nature of managing these chains created engagement that some hunters preferred over more passive methods. The Dynamax Adventure method, introduced in Pokemon Sword and Shield's Crown Tundra DLC, represented perhaps the most generous, legendary, shiny hunting method ever implemented in the series. At the end of Dynamax Adventures, players could encounter legendary Pokemon with shiny odds of 1 in 300 when using the shiny charm, and crucially, they could select which Pokemon to keep at the end of the adventure, allowing them to check whether the legendary was shiny before committing to the catch. This post-catch shiny check meant that hunters could verify results before using limited resources, creating a more forgiving hunt than methods that required checking before catching. Many legendary shinies that had been rare or difficult to hunt in previous generations became reasonably accessible through this method. Slowly, the story widens to encompass how some legendary and mythical Pokemon remain shiny locked across multiple generations, despite community requests for hunting access, creating lasting frustration among collectors who wanted to pursue every possible shiny variant. The Cosmog evolutionary line, Cosmog, Cosmo-M, Solgaleo, and Lunala, was shiny locked across all Generation 7 and 8 appearances, preventing players from obtaining shiny versions of the Sun and Moon mascot legendaries, despite their prominent story roles. This lock persisted even in situations where the Pokemon appeared as gift encounters that could theoretically have been huntable through soft resetting, suggesting an intentional design decision rather than technical limitation. The Zacian, Zamazenta, and Aeternatus trio from Pokemon Sword and Shield faced similar shiny locks that prevented hunting despite being encountered through normal story progression. Players could battle and catch all three legendaries, but could not obtain shiny variants through any legitimate in-game method during the initial release period. Later distributions provided shiny Zacian and Zamazenta through limited time codes, but these events remained region-specific and time-limited, creating the familiar pattern of geographic lottery that had frustrated the international collectors for decades. Shiny Aeternatus never received any distribution during Generation 8, leaving it completely unobtainable legitimately and forcing collectors to wait for potential future events or games. The frustration around these shiny locks stemmed partly from inconsistency. Game Freak allowed some legendary Pokemon to be hunted while locking others without clear pattern or explanation. Players who invested hundreds of hours building shiny living dexes found themselves unable to complete certain evolutionary lines despite being willing to put in the time and effort required. The arbitrary nature of which Pokemon could and couldn't be hunted for shiny variants created a sense that decisions were being made without consideration for dedicated collectors, particularly when locked. Pokemon later became available through limited distributions that many players couldn't access. The Kubfu and Urshifu line from the Isle of Armor DLC presented another case of gift legendary Pokemon being shiny locked during initial distribution, but potentially becoming available through other means in the future. Players received Kubfu as a gift after completing dojo challenges and could evolve it into either Single Strike or Rapid Strike Urshifu, depending on which tower they climbed. Both forms had shiny variants programmed into the games, but remained inaccessible through the gift encounter, suggesting that Game Freak intended to distribute them through future events. This pattern of locking gift legendaries while maintaining shiny data in the game files indicated that shiny locks often served as distribution control rather than permanent restrictions. Before your eyes grow heavy, let's reflect on how the very concept of shiny hunting transformed from a hidden mechanic in Generation 2 to a central collecting activity that Game Freak actively supported through various quality of life improvements and hunting methods. The original Shinies in Gold and Silver appeared with no explanation or fanfare, leaving players confused about why certain Pokémon had different colors and whether something had glitched. The lack of clear communication about shiny mechanics meant that early shiny encounters often went unrecognized or were assumed to be errors rather than rare variants worth preserving. Only through community discussion and information sharing did the nature of shinies become widely understood. Generation 3 temporarily removed the ability to transfer Pokemon from previous generations, creating a situation where any shinies obtained in Gold, Silver, or Crystal became trapped in those games with no path forward. This discontinuity frustrated collectors who had invested time hunting shinies only to discover they couldn't bring those Pokemon into newer games. When later generations restored transfer capabilities through PAL Park and eventually Pokemon Bank and Home, the relief within the collecting community was palpable. The ability to move cherished shinies forward through generations became a core feature that allowed long-term collecting projects to span decades rather than being reset with each new game. The introduction of the shiny charm in Generation 5 marked a significant shift toward Game Freak actively supporting and rewarding shiny hunting as a legitimate collecting goal. By providing an item that improved shiny odds after completing the regional Pokédex, the developers explicitly acknowledged that players wanted to hunt shinies and deserved the mechanical support for doing so. The shiny charm didn't make hunting easy. It merely improved impossible odds to extremely low odds, but the recognition it represented mattered to hunters who had spent years pursuing shinies without any official acknowledgement of their efforts. Later games further reduced shiny odds across the board and introduced additional hunting methods, creating an environment where shinies transitioned from nearly mythical rarities to achievable goals for dedicated collectors. The Pokemon Home Cloud Storage Service, introduced in Generation 8, created new capabilities for managing shiny collections across multiple games and generations, allowing collectors to organize and display their shinies in ways previously impossible. The mobile app component of Home included features for viewing Pokemon in high resolution, reading their summary data, and organizing them into custom boxes with labels and sorting. Collectors could create dedicated boxes for their shiny collections, organizing by type, generation, personal preference, or any other system that made sense to them. This organizational capacity transformed shiny collecting from a scattered activity across multiple game files into a unified project that could be curated and displayed like an art collection. The community aspects of shiny hunting created social dynamics that extended the experience beyond individual gameplay into shared celebration and commiseration. Online forums, Discord servers, and streaming platforms became gathering places for hunters to share their journeys, offer encouragement during long dry spells, and celebrate successful encounters with communities who understood the dedication involved. Watching someone encounter a shiny legendary after weeks of hunting created vicarious excitement that brought communities together around shared passion for these rare variants. The social nature of hunting transformed what could have been a lonely, repetitive activity into a communal experience. As we drift a little deeper tonight, contemplating the nature of rarity itself becomes relevant to understanding why certain shinies hold value beyond their mechanical scarcity. A shiny that takes thousands of encounters to obtain achieves rarity through pure statistical improbability, but that rarity feels different from the rarity of an event-exclusive shiny that was distributed to only a few thousand people worldwide. One type of rarity rewards patience and persistence. Anyone willing to invest time can theoretically achieve it. The other type rewards geographic privilege, timing, or trading connections, factors outside individual control that create permanent haves and have-nots. Both types of rarity have value, but they represent fundamentally different relationships between effort and reward. The rise of streaming and video documentation of shiny hunts created new forms of value around shinies beyond just owning them. Streamers who hunted extremely rare shinies live for audiences transformed the hunt itself into content, creating entertainment value alongside collecting value. A streamer who spent 6 months hunting shiny Arceus in Pokemon Legends. Arceus, only to discover it was shiny locked, created a narrative of frustration and wasted an effort that resonated with audiences despite the ultimate failure. The documented journey became valuable even without the successful catch, suggesting that the process of hunting could matter as much as the result for certain collectors and communities. The philosophical question of whether hacked or cloned shinies diminish the value of legitimate ones has no universally accepted answer within the collecting community, creating ongoing debates about authenticity, effort, and what collecting means. Some collectors argue that only legitimate shinies obtained through proper methods deserve recognition, as they represent genuine dedication and achievement. Others contend that if a Pokemon is functionally identical to a legitimate shiny, with no detectable differences, the distinction matters less than the aesthetic and gameplay value it provides. These debates often become heated because they touch on core values about what makes collecting meaningful. Is it the journey and effort, or the ultimate possession of the desired object? The various forms of authentication and verification that emerged within trading communities attempted to address these philosophical disputes through technical means. Checking a Pokemon's origin game, trainer ID, encounter location, and other metadata could sometimes reveal obvious hacks or impossibilities, but sophisticated hacking created Pokemon that passed all detectable checks. The limitations of player-side verification meant that absolute certainty about legitimacy remained impossible unless you personally caught or bred the Pokemon. This uncertainty created trust dynamics in trading communities where reputation and relationships mattered as much as technical verification. Trusted traders who documented their hunts and maintained consistent collections could command better trading terms than anonymous traders with suspicious collections. The economic reality of shiny Pokemon creates an interesting parallel to real-world collectibles markets, where rarity, condition, provenance, and demand determine value in ways that extend beyond the object's inherent utility. A shiny Arceus obtained from the original Japanese movie distribution possesses historical value that a shiny Arceus from a later, more widely distributed event cannot match, even though they are functionally identical Pokemon. The context and story surrounding how a Pokemon was obtained becomes part of its value, similar to how a baseball card's worth depends partly on its condition, partly on the player it features, and partly on its provenance and history. Collectors willing to pay premium trading value for specific shinies often care as much about the story and legitimacy as about the Pokemon itself. Before we move deeper, let's acknowledge how different players engage with shiny collecting based on personal preferences and what aspects of collecting they find most satisfying. Some hunters focus exclusively on completing shiny living dexes, attempting to obtain at least one shiny variant of every Pokemon species. This comprehensive approach creates clear goals and measurable progress, but requires extraordinary dedication given the hundreds of species across multiple generations. Others focus on shiny hunting, their favorite Pokemon, or themed collections, all water types, all legendary Pokemon, or all Pokémon from a particular generation. These focused collections allow deeper engagement with specific categories while remaining more achievable than complete dexes. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet facts, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Maybe let it play while you rest. You might learn something new before you drift off again.